Alright, let's talk about Thomas Hardy, one of the towering figures whose life and writing bridge two worlds, the Victorian and the modern. Hardy was born in Dorset in 1840 and died in 1928. That date pairing is an exam favorite, so keep it in mind. His father was a fiddler and stonemason, and his mother was a strong influence on his imagination. The rhythms of rural Dorset life, its fields, dialects, and hardships shaped everything Hardy wrote. He often said he felt like a successor to William Barnes, the Dorset dialect poet, and that connection has been asked in exam. Hardy's novels are often called the Wessex novels because they're all set in a semi-fictional region he called Wessex, based on southwest England. He even drew his own map of it, and that's another key exam fact. Through this invented landscape, Hardy explored universal themes: love, fate, morality, and the struggle of individuals against a vast, indifferent world. Now, Hardy had a deep fascination with history, especially with old ruins, folk customs, and the Napoleonic Wars subjects that show up most powerfully in his massive verse drama, The Dynasts. This work reflects his belief in what he called evolutionary meliorism, the idea that human progress happens slowly through natural evolution rather than divine plan. Both The Dynasts and that phrase have been asked in exam. Although he became world famous for novels like Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure, Hardy's fiction often faced harsh criticism, especially for its sexual honesty and bleak outlook. Victorian readers found his realism unsettling. After the controversy surrounding Jude the Obscure, Hardy gave up writing novels altogether and turned fully to poetry in 1898. From then on, he poured his energy into verse, and by the end of his life, he had written around 1,000 poems. His lyric poetry is now considered some of the most beautiful in English literature, admired by later poets like Robert Frost and W.H. Auden. But Hardy's poems are rarely cheerful. They're filled with fatalism, loss, and the sense that human lives are shaped by blind forces, nature, chance, and time. After the death of his first wife, Emma, Hardy wrote a series of heartbreaking Emma poems, meditations on memory, love, and regret. These have often been asked in exam as examples of his emotional depth and his ability to turn grief into art. His personal life remained complicated. He later married Florence Dugdale, a woman much younger than himself, but his heart both literally and emotionally stayed with Emma. When he died in 1928, his ashes were buried in Westminster Abbey, but his heart was interred in Stinsford Church in Dorset, a symbolic link between national honour and private love. Hardy's writing style, both in prose and poetry, is known for its musicality and intensity. Some critics call him gloomy, but others, like Virginia Woolf, saw him as a visionary, someone who used realism to explore the mystery and beauty of human life. That Woolf comment, by the way, has also been asked in exam. So, in short, Thomas Hardy began as a Victorian realist, ended as a modern poet, and in between created a universe, Wessex, that feels as real as any place on the map. His themes of fate, suffering, and endurance still speak to readers today. And perhaps that's why, even after his death, Hardy's heart quite literally remained in Dorset. Let's step into the rugged, tragic world of Thomas Hardy, one of the greatest novelists of the Victorian Age. Hardy's fiction gives us the drama of ordinary lives caught between fate, love, and the indifferent forces of nature, all set in his imaginary land of Wessex, which is actually based on rural southwest England. That Wessex setting has been asked in exam, so make a note of it. Let's begin with Hardy's fourth novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, published in 1874. It was serialized monthly in Cornhill magazine, and yes, that serial publication has been asked in exam. The story follows Bathsheba Everdeen, a spirited and independent young woman who inherits her uncle's large farm. That inheritance sets the stage for Hardy's exploration of pride, love, and social duty. Bathsheba captures the heart of Gabriel Oak, a humble but steadfast shepherd. Yet when he proposes, she turns him down, one of the most famous rejections in English fiction. Soon after, Bathsheba meets Sergeant Troy, a charming but irresponsible soldier. Despite warnings, she is dazzled by him and marries him. That marriage, by the way, has been asked in exam. Meanwhile, William Boldwood, a wealthy and lonely farmer, is also in love with her. When Bathsheba's life begins to unravel, Troy gambles, disappears, and is presumed dead. Boldwood grows increasingly obsessed. When Troy suddenly reappears, Boldwood's emotions explode, and he kills Troy in a fit of passion. In the end, Boldwood is imprisoned, and Gabriel Oak, who has stood loyally by Bathsheba through every disaster, becomes her quiet savior. Only then does she finally recognize her true love and marry him. Far from the Madding Crowd was Hardy's first major literary success, and it established him as a leading novelist of rural realism and moral complexity. Next, we move to The Return of the Native, published in 1878, first appearing in Belgravia magazine, another exam favorite. This novel unfolds on Egdon Heath, a dark, brooding landscape that feels almost like a living character. Hardy uses it to symbolize fate, isolation, and the eternal rhythms of nature, and yes, that power of nature theme has been asked in exam. The plot follows Clym Yeobright, who returns home from Paris seeking a simpler, more meaningful life. But his return sets off a chain of tragedy. Clym's cousin, Thomasin, is kind and dutiful, while Eustacia V, beautiful and restless, dreams of escaping the dullness of the heath. Clym and Eustacia fall in love, but their desires clash. She longs for the city, while he wants to stay rooted in Wessex. Misunderstandings, accidents, and cruel coincidences pile up, leading to despair and death. The Return of the Native captures Hardy's recurring themes: love and pride struggling against fate, and the haunting idea that happiness and destiny are never quite in harmony. Finally, we come to The Mayor of Casterbridge, published in 1886, first serialized in The Graphic, another exam reference. This is perhaps Hardy's most powerful tragedy. It begins with Michael Henchard, a poor farm laborer who, in a moment of drunken recklessness, sells his wife and child at a fair, one of the most shocking openings in Victorian fiction. That infamous act has been asked in exam. Racked with guilt, Henchard swears an oath to abstain from alcohol for 21 years, also an exam point. Over time, he works hard, becomes a successful grain merchant, and even rises to the position of Mayor of Casterbridge. But fate, in true Hardy fashion, does not forget. Years later, his wife, Susan, and their daughter, Elizabeth Jane, return. Henchard's rival, Donald Farfrae, begins as his employee but soon surpasses him in business and wins the townspeople's admiration. Pride and jealousy lead to Henchard's downfall. As everything he loves slips away, his business, his daughter's affection, and his dignity, Henchard dies alone, leaving behind a heart-wrenching will that asks for no burial ceremony, no mourning, and no remembrance. That haunting end, his death in isolation, has also been asked in exam. Together, these novels, Far from the Madding Crowd, The Return of the Native, and The Mayor of Casterbridge, define Hardy's tragic vision. He gives us rural life in all its beauty and cruelty, showing how love, pride, and fate can quietly destroy even the strongest souls. Hardy's Wessex isn't just a setting, it's a universe where nature, chance, and character collide to shape destiny. Let's step into Thomas Hardy's world, the haunting, rural, and deeply tragic world of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a pure woman faithfully presented. That subtitle itself, A Pure Woman Faithfully Presented, has been asked in exam, and it captures everything Hardy wanted to say. Tess may fall, but her heart remains innocent. The novel was first published in The Graphic in 1891, and it's set in Hardy's fictional Wessex, his recreated version of southwest England, another point often asked in exam. Now, the story begins with Tess Durbeyfield, a simple country girl whose life changes when her father learns that the family might be descended from the noble D'Urbervilles. That discovery fills the poor family with false pride and impossible dreams. Tess is sent to claim kinship with the wealthy D'Urbervilles, and that's where she meets Alec d'Urberville, a charming but predatory man. Alec seduces Tess, or, as many critics argue, assaults her, and this event destroys her peace forever. Both Alec's betrayal and Tess's shame and isolation have been asked in exam. Heartbroken, Tess returns home carrying guilt, poverty, and a child born of that sin. The baby, named Sorrow, another fact you must remember for exam, soon dies. Hardy describes the burial in one of the most unforgettable passages in English fiction. He writes, "So the baby was carried in a small deal box under an ancient woman's shawl to the churchyard that night and buried by lantern light at the cost of £1 and a pint of beer to the sexton in that shabby corner of God's allotment where he lets the nettles grow." That passage, with its stark compassion for an unbaptized child, has been directly quoted in exam. After this tragedy, Tess decides to escape her past. She finds work as a dairymaid at Talbothays Dairy, where she meets Angel Clare, an idealistic young man and the son of a clergyman. This setting, Talbothays Dairy, has been asked in exam too. Angel falls in love with her simplicity and quiet strength, seeing her as a symbol of purity. They marry, but on their wedding night, Tess confesses her past, hoping for forgiveness. Instead, Angel, unable to rise above his rigid morality, rejects her. That rejection and his cruel judgment mark one of the most tragic turns in the novel, and it's been asked in exam. Angel leaves for Brazil, hoping to forget her, but fate punishes both. Tess, struggling for survival, ends up back under Alec's influence. Alec, now a preacher turned hypocrite, persuades her to return to him out of desperation. When Angel finally returns, remorseful and ready to forgive, Tess has already been broken by circumstance. In a moment of anguish, she kills Alec d'Urberville, an act of tragic rebellion, and yes, that murder scene is another exam question. Afterward, Tess and Angel briefly reunite. They hide in an ancient stone circle, a symbolic, almost pagan refuge from the world. But the law soon catches up with them. Tess is arrested peacefully, tried, and sentenced to death, all facts often tested in exam. In the novel's final scene, Tess is executed. Hardy doesn't describe the hanging directly, but the imagery says it all. As the sun rises, Angel stands beside Tess's sister, Liza Lou, described as one of the two speechless gazers. That phrase, two speechless gazers, has also been asked in exam. Hardy ends with quiet devastation. Tess's suffering ends, but the injustice of society lingers. She was pure, but the world refused to see it. Through Tess of the d'Urbervilles, Hardy exposed the hypocrisy of Victorian morality, the cruelty of a world that punishes women for what men excuse in themselves. And that's why Hardy subtitled it "A Pure Woman Faithfully Presented." In his eyes, Tess's purity lies not in chastity, but in honesty, courage, and love, and that message still echoes powerfully today. Alright, let's talk about Thomas Hardy, one of the most powerful realist novelists and poets of the late Victorian age. And for today, we'll focus on two of his most unforgettable works, Jude the Obscure and The Darkling Thrush. Let's start with Jude the Obscure, Hardy's last completed novel, published in 1895, and yes, that fact has been asked in exam. Interestingly, it first appeared in an abridged form under the title Heart's Insurgent, serialized in Harper's New Monthly magazine, another key exam detail. Now, who is Jude? Jude Foley is a poor, working-class stonemason with an extraordinary dream. He wants to study at Christminster, a fictional version of Oxford. That dream, by the way, often appears in exam questions. Jude's story is about ambition colliding with social barriers, the working man's impossible climb toward intellectual freedom. But Jude's personal life soon becomes a tragedy. He marries Arabella Dawn, a sensual and practical woman, but the marriage quickly collapses. Later, he meets his cousin Sue Bridehead, a free-spirited, intelligent woman who becomes the true love of his life. Yet, society refuses to accept their unconventional relationship. They live together unmarried, facing rejection and isolation at every turn. And then comes the most devastating moment, the death of Jude's children, one of the darkest scenes in Victorian fiction. That scene alone shocked the entire literary world and made the novel controversial enough to be called Jude the Obscene by its critics. Hardy was deeply hurt by the backlash, and this novel actually led him to stop writing fiction altogether and turn completely to poetry. Through Jude the Obscure, Hardy exposes the cruelty of class divisions, the hypocrisy of marriage laws, and the tragic cost of social aspiration. It's bleak, yes, but deeply human. Jude isn't just a man chasing education, he's a symbol of every soul crushed by rigid systems. Now let's shift from the novel to one of Hardy's most haunting poems, The Darkling Thrush. This poem was written at the very end of the 19th century and first published in 1900 in the London Times. Originally, Hardy called it By the Century's Deathbed, which has been asked in exam, and that title really tells you what the poem is about, the death of an age. It later appeared in Poems of the Past and Present in 1901, another key exam detail. The poem opens on a bleak winter evening. The landscape is frozen, lifeless, and silent. Hardy stands by a gate, staring into the fading light of the old century. Everything feels desolate, symbolic of the dying Victorian faith in progress and religion. These first two stanzas capture the despair and emptiness of the modern world. Then suddenly in the third stanza, something remarkable happens. An aged thrush begins to sing. That moment, an aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, has been asked in exam. Despite the cold and the decay, the bird's song rises, described as an even song of joy, illimited. Hardy is struck by the contrast. How can such pure joy exist in such desolation? In the final stanza, the poet wonders if the bird knows of some blessed hope that he himself cannot perceive. Maybe the thrush, fragile and old, represents faith, something Hardy feels is almost extinct in the modern age. Interestingly, the word darkling connects this poem to Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, another work about the loss of faith, and yes, that intertextual link has been asked in exam too. So, while Jude the Obscure mourns the collapse of human aspiration, the Darkling Thrush captures the dying spirit of an entire century, yet it ends with a faint, flickering possibility of hope. If you think about it, both works share the same heartbeat, isolation, struggle, and the stubborn search for meaning in a changing world. Hardy gives us tragedy, but also resilience, the courage to keep listening for a bird song in the darkness.